This is a true story, one that my family never speaks of. It's about the day my grandfather took a lifetime of love and turned it into an afternoon of ash. The weight of the afternoon sun pressed down on the manicured lawns of my grandfather's Chestnut Hill estate, heavy and suffocating. We were all gathered in the grand drawing room, the air thick with the scent of old leather and fresh lilies, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic tap of my grandfather Arthur's antique oak cane against the polished hardwood floor. He stood before the marble fireplace, his once powerful frame made frail by a stroke, his new, much younger wife, Serena, a viper in silk, coiled at his side. He had gathered us, his son, my father David, his daughter, my Aunt Eleanor, and me, under the pretense of a special announcement. My father caught my eye and gave a small, hopeful smile, assuming this was about a new trust for the grandchildren. But as Arthur gripped the head of his cane, his knuckles turning white, he looked not at his children, but at the portrait of my late grandmother hanging over the mantel and said, "As of this morning, I have signed a new last will and testament. David, Eleanor, you are no longer beneficiaries of my estate. Everything, the house, the company's shares, the entire fortune, it all goes to Serena. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows." The silence that followed was a physical thing, a crushing pressure that sucked the air from the room. My father's smile didn't just fade. It shattered. He looked as if he'd been struck, a deep, guttural sound escaping his lips, a noise of pure animal shock. And Eleanor, always the more stoic of the two, simply paled, her hand flying to her throat as if to stop her heart from leaping out. Serena, meanwhile, placed a perfectly manicured hand on Arthur's arm, her expression a masterclass in feigned sympathy. "Arthur, darling, perhaps this is too much for them to take in all at once," she cooed, her voice like poison honey. But her eyes, when they met mine for a fleeting second, held a triumphant, reptilian glint. My grandfather, his face a mask of grim resolve, shook his head. "They needed to hear it from me. I will not have vultures circling my body before it's even cold," he rasped, the words twisted by the lingering effects of his stroke. He was parroting a line I was sure Serena had fed him 100 times. The idea that his own children, who had spent months caring for him, were vultures was so ludicrous, so utterly alien to the man he used to be, that I felt a surge of hot, disbelieving rage. My father finally found his voice. "Dad, what are you talking about? Vultures? This is Serena's doing. Can't you see she's been poisoning you against us?" Arthur slammed the base of his cane onto the floor, the crack echoing like a gunshot. "Enough! I see with perfect clarity, for the first time in years. Serena showed me the truth. You just want to put me in a home and carve up my legacy. It was a lie, a grotesque perversion of reality. We had arranged for the best in-home care, fought with doctors to keep him in the house he loved. Serena had been his grief counselor, a woman who had appeared just a month after my grandmother's funeral. She'd counseled him right into her bed and then into her web. My aunt began to sob, silent tears tracking through her makeup. "Father, how could you?" she whispered. He didn't even look at her. His eyes, clouded and distant, were fixed on Serena. "Get out," he commanded, his voice trembling with a fury that wasn't his own. "This is Serena's house now. You are no longer welcome here." We were escorted out by a private security guard Serena had hired weeks ago, another red flag we'd ignored. As a massive oak door clicked shut behind us, sealing us off from our own family history, my father stumbled on the steps, catching himself on the stone balustrade. He wasn't looking at the house anymore. He was looking at the sky, his face a ruin of confusion and pain, as if trying to understand how the world he had known his entire life had just ceased to exist. In that moment, watching my father's spirit crumble, I knew this wasn't just a family dispute. It was a heist, and the crime was still in progress. The weeks that followed were a slow-motion nightmare. My father and aunt were ghosts, haunting their own lives. They'd call each other, have the same circular conversations filled with disbelief and pain, and hang up with no answers. They were blocked from calling the estate, their numbers unrecognized. Emails went unanswered. A registered letter sent by my aunt's lawyer was returned, unopened. Serena had built a fortress around my grandfather, and we were on the outside, helpless. It was during one of those bleak nights, while listening to my father leave another desperate, pleading voicemail on his own father's phone, that I started to truly grasp the premeditation of it all. This wasn't a whirlwind romance that had clouded an old man's judgment. This was a calculated campaign. I thought back over the past 6 months. Serena's arrival had been so seamless. She was introduced by a friend of a friend as a specialist in helping seniors navigate loss. She was charming, attentive, and always deferred to my grandfather. She listened for hours to his stories of building his empire from nothing. She learned his vanities, his fears, his regrets. She found the cracks in his psyche and filled them with poison. The first big sign was when she fired his longtime nurse, a wonderful woman named Maria who had been with him since before the stroke. Serena claimed Maria was stealing trinkets, a lie so flimsy it was insulting. But my grandfather, his mind already fogged with suspicion, believed her. In Maria's place came a new nurse, a stern woman who reported directly to Serena. Then came the isolation. Friends of my grandfather who used a visit for weekly chess games were told he was too tired for company. His investment manager of 30 years was replaced by a new firm Serena recommended. She was severing his every tie to his old life, to his own reality, and to the only voice he heard was hers. I started digging. It wasn't hard to find her online footprint, but it was all surface level, all too perfect. A professionally designed website for her counseling services, testimonials that were glowing but vague, a social media presence that was curated to show a woman of quiet sophistication and charity. It felt fake. It felt like a stage name. So I went deeper. I used my savings to hire a private investigator, a former Boston PD detective named Frank Rizzo. He was a gruff, no-nonsense guy who smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes. I met him in a dimly lit bar in the North End, laying out the whole sordid story. He listened without interruption, his expression unchanging. When I finished, he took a long drag from his cigarette and blew the smoke toward the ceiling. "So, the Black Widow snagged herself a whale," he grunted. "This ain't her first rodeo, kid. The question is, how many skeletons are in her closet?" 2 weeks later, Frank called me. "You need to see this," was all he said. We met at his cluttered office near Haymarket. He tossed a manila folder onto his desk. "Her name isn't Serena Dubois. It's Sharon O'Malley, from Philly, and she has a history." Inside the folder were documents that made my blood run cold. 2 other wealthy widowers in the last decade, one in Palm Beach, one in Scottsdale. Both had died suddenly, leaving their entire fortunes to their new, much younger wives. In both cases, the families had contested the wills, but Sharon, or whatever name she was using then, had her legal work buttoned up tight. She'd walk away with millions, disappear for a year or two, and then resurface somewhere new, with a new name and a new target. She wasn't just a gold digger. She was a predator. But the most damning thing Frank found wasn't a legal document. It was a name listed on an old police report from a domestic disturbance call in Philadelphia 15 years ago. A brother named Kevin O'Malley. Frank looked at me, his eyes grim. "This guy's bad news. Small-time grifter, couple of stints for fraud. He's the weak link, the one part of her past she can't erase." Serena, or rather Sharon, was solidifying her power with terrifying speed. She hosted a lavish garden party at the estate, a clear signal to Chestnut Hill society that she was the new matriarch. We only knew about it because a family friend sent my aunt a clipped article from the society pages of the Boston Globe. There was a picture of her, draped in my grandmother's pearls, standing next to my grandfather. He looked like a prop, his smile vacant, his eyes hollow. Serena was glowing, the picture of triumph. The article painted her as a savior, a sophisticated philanthropist who had brought Arthur back to life after his tragic loss. My father saw the picture, and I thought he was going to have a heart attack right there in his kitchen. The legal avenues were closing on us just as quickly. Our lawyer, a man who had worked for our family for 40 years, was despondent. "The will is ironclad," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. She had him evaluated by a psychiatrist she hired. He was declared of sound mind and body when he signed it. She has power of attorney, medically and financially. She controls everything, David. Challenging this in court would be a bloodbath. It would cost you millions, and I honestly believe we would lose. It was the ultimate checkmate. Sharon had used my grandfather's own fortune to build a legal fortress around him, and we were left outside, penniless and powerless to save him. The villain wasn't just winning. She was dancing on the grave of our family's legacy. She was untouchable. The final blow came a week later. My father suffered a minor heart attack. The doctors said it was brought on by extreme stress. I found in the hospital bed at Mass General, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen him. He was staring at the ceiling, tubes connected to his arm, his face pale and etched with profound weariness. He had lost the fight. "It's just money, Leo," he whispered, his voice raspy. "Let it go. I can't do this anymore. She's won." He turned his head to the window, and I saw a single tear trace a path through the gray stubble on his cheek. In that moment, watching my father, a man of incredible strength and integrity, utterly broken, something inside me shifted. The grief and helplessness that had been choking me for weeks burned away, leaving behind something cold, hard, and sharp. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was never just about the money. It was about the name my grandfather had built, the love my grandmother had infused into that home, the dignity of my father and aunt. Sharon O'Malley had tried to erase my family. She had tried to erase us. I sat there in the sterile silence of the hospital room, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor counting out the seconds, and I made a vow. I wouldn't fight her in a courtroom. I wouldn't fight her with lawyers. She had built her kingdom on psychological manipulation, on twisting an old man's love and fear into a weapon. I would tear it down the same way. I would enter her world of lies and deceit, and I would burn it to the ground from the inside out. I looked at my sleeping father, and a chilling calm washed over me. The war had just begun. My first move was to find Kevin O'Malley. Frank's information led me to a seedy sports bar in South Boston that reeked of stale beer and desperation. Kevin was exactly what you'd expect. Greasy hair, shifty eyes, and a thirst for cheap whiskey that was never quite quenched. He was nursing a drink at the end of the bar, watching the Bruins game with zero interest. He was wary at first, his eyes darting around like a cornered rat. I didn't play games. I put an envelope on the bar with $5,000 in cash inside, almost everything I had left from selling my car. "I want to talk about your sister, Sharon," I said. His eyes widened at the sight of the money, then narrowed with suspicion. "Don't know anyone by that name." "How about Serena Dubois?" I pressed, sliding the envelope a little closer. He flinched. I had him. For the next hour, fueled by the cash and several more whiskeys, Kevin sang like canary. He hated his sister. She had cut him off years ago after he'd tried to blackmail her over one of her previous marks. He saw her as an arrogant snob who had gotten lucky, while he was the one with the real talent for the grift. He was bitter, resentful, and, most importantly, predictable. He was motivated by greed and jealousy. He was a perfect weapon. My plan began to form, not as a legal strategy, but as a psychological demolition. Sharon's power came from her absolute control over my grandfather's reality. To break her, I had to shatter that reality. I had to make my grandfather believe, with every fiber of his being, that she was the one betraying him. Over the next month, I orchestrated a series of unfortunate events. I used a burner phone to send an anonymous tip to a local gossip columnist about Serena's lavish spending, specifically mentioning a new diamond necklace she'd bought, identical to one my grandmother used to wear. The column was subtle, but it was designed to plant a seed of doubt. My grandfather, a notoriously frugal man, would hate the ostentatious display. Next, I had Kevin make the first move. He was to show up at the estate, unannounced, pretending to be a long-lost cousin from Ireland, using a fake name. He was to act drunk and belligerent, demanding money. The goal was to rattle Serena, to bring her sordid past crashing into her pristine present. According to the terrified housekeeper who I'd managed to contact and bribe for information, the scene was spectacular. Serena had nearly fainted when she saw him. She had security throw him out, but the damage was done. My grandfather was confused and agitated for days, asking who that man was and why he looked so familiar. Serena had to invent a flurry of lies, raising my grandfather's paranoia. The keystone of my plan, however, was far more intricate. Sharon had set up several shell corporations to begin funneling money out of the main estate account. Frank, the PI, had identified them. I created a set of fake bank statements, meticulously designed to look like they came from an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. The statement showed large, regular transfers from the estate into an account under the name Sharon O'Malley. I also created a forged letter, supposedly from Sharon to Kevin, outlining their plan to put my grandfather in a facility as soon as they had secured a certain amount of liquid assets. It was pure fiction, but it was built on a foundation of truth. It was designed to prey on my grandfather's deepest, most specific fears, the very fears Sharon herself had cultivated. The final piece was a stage. I needed a moment of maximum emotional impact. I told Kevin to call Serena, to tell her he was going to expose everything unless she paid him $200,000. He was to demand she meet him, alone, at a specific bench in the Boston Public Garden. He recorded the call. Her panicked, furious response, in which she acknowledged her past and threatened him, was pure gold. Now all the pieces were on the board. All I had to do was set the trap. The day of the intervention, as I called it in my mind, was gray and overcast, the sky over Boston the color of slate. I felt a strange, detached calm, like a surgeon before a delicate and dangerous operation. Everything hinged on timing and execution. I had given Kevin his final instructions and the balance of his payment. He was to go to the house an hour before I arrived, not as a drunken lout this time, but as a penitent brother, begging to speak to my grandfather to clear his conscience. His job was to prime the pump of chaos. I arrived at the estate at precisely 3 p.m., my father and aunt with me. They didn't know the full extent of my plan, only that I had found something that could change everything. They were nervous, their faces pale with anxiety. The new security guard tried to stop us at the gate, but I had already called the local police on a non-emergency line, telling them an elderly man was being held against his will by a caregiver and that his family was attempting a wellness check. The sight of a patrol car pulling up behind us was enough to make the guard reluctantly open the gates. We walked into the lion's den. The scene in the drawing room was already tense. My grandfather was in his usual chair by the fire, looking agitated. Serena stood beside him, her face a mass of fury, while Kevin sat on the edge of a sofa, looking appropriately wretched. What is the meaning of this? Serena hissed, her eyes locking onto mine with pure hatred. I'm calling the police. They're already here, I said calmly, nodding toward the door where an officer was now standing, observing. We're here to talk to our father, Serena, or should I say Sharon? Her name hung in the air. She paled slightly, but recovered quickly. Arthur, darling, they're insane. This man, she said, pointing a trembling finger at Kevin, is a lunatic who broke in here. That was my cue. Is he? I asked, my voice ringing with false sincerity. He says he's your brother. He says you two have been planning this for a very long time. I pulled the forged bank statements from my briefcase and laid them on the coffee table in front of my grandfather. He says you've been moving money, a lot of money, to an account in the Cayman Islands, under your real name. Arthur squinted at the papers. His hands trembled as he picked them up. The familiar letterhead of his own bank, the large, impossible numbers, the name Sharon O'Malley. It was all designed to be a cognitive bomb. What is this? He whispered, his voice weak. Lies! Serena shrieked. These are forgeries. Arthur, he's trying to trick you. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out my phone. Your brother was kind enough to record your last phone call, Sharon. I hit play. The sound of her voice filled the room. Not the soft, caring tone she used with my grandfather, but a shrill, venomous hiss. You listen to me, you pathetic leech. You will not ruin this for me. I am in control here. That old man will believe anything I tell him. The blood drained from my grandfather's face. He looked from the phone to Serena, his clouded eyes showing a flicker of horrified clarity. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. It was a combination of everything. The reappearance of her brother, the proof on the bank statements, and now, the sound of her own voice confirming his deepest fears. Her spell was broken. Kevin, playing his part to perfection, fell to his knees. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Henderson," he cried. "She made me do it. She said we'd put you in a home as soon as the money was clear." That was the kill shot. The phrase he'd once used against his own children was now being turned on him by the woman he trusted. My grandfather rose from his chair, his body shaking with a rage I hadn't seen since before his stroke. He wasn't frail anymore. He was a titan again, fueled by pure, unadulterated fury. He grabbed the oak cane leaning against his chair. "You," he roared, his voice cracking with betrayal. He didn't swing it at her. Instead, he brought it down on a priceless porcelain vase on the mantelpiece, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. He smashed a lamp, then swept a row of framed photos off a side table. Serena backed away, her face a canvas of genuine terror. "Get out," my grandfather bellowed, pointing the cane at her. "Get out of my house, you goddamn snake." The aftermath was swift and brutal. My grandfather, in his righteous fury, was a force of nature. He got his old lawyer on the phone right then and there, with us as witnesses. He barked orders. His voice regained command it once had. Revoke the power of attorney. Invalidate the new will. File a restraining order. Freeze every account Serena had access to. She was escorted off the property by the police, allowed to take nothing but the clothes on her back and her handbag. She didn't say a word. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by the stunned, hollow look of a gambler who had just lost everything on a single, final bet. She glanced back at me just once before getting into the taxi she was forced to call, and in her eyes, I saw not just hatred, but a flicker of grudging respect. It was the look one predator gives another. Kevin O'Malley vanished as soon as he had his money, likely already on a bus to whatever city he planned to infest next. He had served his purpose. In the weeks that followed, our family tried to piece itself back together. My father and aunt were reinstated as beneficiaries and given control over my grandfather's care. We hired back Maria, the old nurse, and slowly, carefully, began to rebuild the trust that had been so expertly demolished. The Chestnut Hill house, once a symbol of our humiliation, felt like ours again, though it was now haunted by the echoes of the battle that had been fought within its walls. We never saw or heard from Sharon O'Malley again. Frank's contact said she was last seen in Miami, working as a waitress. The fortune was gone. Her reputation in the circles she preyed upon was ruined. She had been exposed, disarmed, and cast out into the wilderness she so richly deserved. We had won. The revenge was complete. But victory didn't feel the way I thought it would. There was no triumphant celebration, no feeling of righteous joy. There was only a quiet, somber sense of order restored, of a great wrong righted at a terrible cost. The true casualty of the war was my grandfather. We had saved his fortune, but we had lost a man. The shock of the betrayal, the realization of his own foolishness, had broken something deep inside him. The fire in his eyes that had flared so brightly on that final day had dimmed into embers of confusion and fear. His paranoia, once a tool for Serena to wield, was now a permanent fixture of his mind, turned inward on itself. I visited him a few months later. He was sitting in his chair by the fire, the oak cane resting against his knee. The house was quiet. He looked up as I came in, his eyes searching my face for a long moment, as if trying to place me in the shifting landscape of his memory. He finally gave a small, uncertain smile. I sat with him, and we talked about nothing for a while. The weather, the red socks, the changing leaves outside his window. As I stood up to leave, he reached out and grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. He looked me square in the eye, his gaze filled with a terrifying, lucid panic. He leaned in close, his voice a dry whisper that chilled me to the bone. "How do I know I can trust you?" The end.